I'm Kat.
I'm Arden 13.
Welcome to our show, World Tiger.
Building Dragons.
Today we have a very special guest joining us at the lunch table.
They are a huge inspiration to us as world builders, but also a YouTube channel that we have been following for a very, very long time.
Today we have the one,
the only,
Runesmith.
Runesmith is joining us for a brief conversation. We have a bunch of questions that we wanted to ask him specifically about world building and tabletop gaming in general, so we thought it would be awesome if we could get him on here. There are so many questions that we have to get through, so let's not waste any time.
Let's get started.
So we're here. We finally cornered him, got him on Zoom. So excited about this. We are meeting with Runesmith, who is a very, very prolific YouTuber, huge inspiration, but we cornered him to ask him some questions about world building, among other things.
So once you decide that you're going to start world building, where do you start? What is your beginning, what is the thing that you enjoy most just starting with?
I think just with everything that I approach, I try to look at the abstract more than the finite rules. So I'd say I either start with universal laws, a global map, or the gods. I think the deities are one of the most important things when making a world, because usually they're the beginning of the history, and they also define what is most fundamental about your world. Like if you have different domains, then you need gods to run those domains, and whatever ones you pick are going to be more important than other aspects of that world.
So what was your first original setting? Something that you created, or maybe your first time DMing? Maybe the first world that you built?
Yeah, I had to look at this question and try and remember if there was one before the main one that I run. And after we had kind of walked away from that first set of games, we were down a DM. So I was like, okay, well, I've been reading the books the most, so I'll kind of try and make my own little setting. And I did it for just a handful of our groups at the time, or our group member at the time, just a few people, and we would go over to their house. So I was like, okay, how do I make this a little bit unique? So instead of doing the whole, you enter a tavern or you wind up in jail for something you didn't do, I was like, okay, what if everyone got eaten by a giant worm and were transported to some other dimension made by some crazy wizard, so I could compact everything, the whole adventure, into this like Banjo-Kazooie 1 size world where everything is just around her, and like just a big collectathon in the area where the big bad is waiting for you to go fight him. So it's just raw adventure, and it was really fun.
Nice. So in a worm, like a Alaskan bullworm?
It was a giant purple worm, which I think the Alaskan bullworm might have taken some inspiration from that.
Yeah, probably.
Both from the same nightmare.
I would agree.
So how many original settings have you actually put to paper? Like either, I mean, I don't think any world building is ever finished, but how many have you started, or like a good approximate number?
Just like settings that are distinct from one another? Yeah. I kind of treat world building in a way like I used to try and play Minecraft as a kid, where I don't want to go and create new worlds constantly. I could just like pick up my roots and move to a different part of the same setting and just develop that and make it distinct from the other one. So my world for the game that we played on Arcane Arcade, the Tesseract, which is my main paracosm, so to speak, that one has, I think, 3 or 4 different planets, each one that serves as a different setting. And there's a lot, like I gave myself complete freedom in that setting so I could do whatever I wanted with it. So that's the one I developed the most. But a lot of the other ones I think are mostly for like offshoots or one-shots where I don't get married to an idea. I just develop it, and that's the extent of it. I'd say maybe a couple dozen in that sense, but worlds that I've actually developed, I would say maybe 4 or 5.
I think that's a really good idea, actually, that I had never considered. Rather than tying yourself to be like, oh, well, this is what's going to happen in this setting, and then if I have another idea, I'm just going to throw that somewhere else, just like picking up and moving to another part of the map.
Or making another planet.
Right.
Like,
that's genius. Write that one down.
One of the major features of that universe is that there are 2 planets that are tide locked, that are the exact same size. there's an occurrence that happens that keeps them separate from one another instead of colliding into each other. But by doing that, I was like, okay, well, one can be sci-fi and one can be fantasy. One's more developed and one's less developed, and just like which god governed each world. So a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the next couple questions are going to be more about like your process of world building and kind of the strategies that you employ in your writing. So what really inspired you to begin the process of world building for that first world that you have?
I think everyone who kind of wants to be creative or wants to reimagine the media that they see, they eventually start to make their own world, their own little media set. So as a kid, I was always really interested in that, and I'm sure I made a lot of short stories and stuff that didn't necessarily pertain to any world that I had planned. But once I got into D&D, I was like, wait, you could just make these and pretend that people care about them, and then develop them and just kind of do your own thing. So I think D&D is definitely a really big lead into that. I used to want to write some novels and do a lot of character designs as a kid. Like that's what I wanted to do growing up. So having those two kind of semi-developed skill sets, it was a lot of fun to immediately move into world building once I realized what it was.
Nice.
Nice. When you're world building, do you prefer to start small, like you start off with a small hamlet or a town and then you kind of branch out and build the world from there? Or do you start off with your world stage and then you work your way into the details?
Yeah, I definitely start with the grand concept, but I do think that it would be really fun to explore. That's actually mentioned in the Dungeon Master's Guide in 5th edition, where it says, ideally, if you're writing a game, start with the hub world or the main city center and just have that be the map, and then expand the map as the players explore it. I haven't done that before. I think that's a really inspiring idea, but yeah, I probably stick with the grand before the or the macro before the micro.
What is something that you're most prone to fixate on in your world building?
That's an interesting question. So I will instead bounce it back to you while I think.
So one thing that I constantly find myself doing and fixating on is that if I start an idea of a certain concept or a certain facet of the world building, I won't stop writing about it, or I can't stop articulating it until I have articulated it to the fullest, even if my initial intention was to give it an air of mystery and just like, this is, you don't have to know about this, but it's just going to be in the back of my head. It can't be in the back of my head. I'll lose sleep over it.
No, I think
mystery development's really tough.
I think I suffer from that too, where it's like, I want to know absolutely everything about this super secret thing, but then that also makes me want to tell someone about this super secret thing that I've developed, and I worked really hard on it. Well, now it's not a secret anymore.
I've kind of pushed myself to the far edge of that, where instead of just revealing all my secrets, I like take the most important details and then I enshroud them and I hold on to them like it's life or death. I won't let go of like what the villain's full plan is unless the adventurers really kind of dig in and look for it. And generally they don't do that because that's not how people play the game.
Right.
So they'll never really understand like what even was all of that. What kind of bait and switch was that? And I'm like, you'll never know.
You'll never know.
Yeah. I'd say that my issue with world building is actually kind of the inverse, where I choose not to get hyper interested in things because I try to stay really abstract, and everything's supposed to be really malleable for the players. Which means that there's a lot of stuff that I underdevelop. So I'll spread myself really thin across the whole globe and be like, oh, this is how nature works. This is how these cities work. This is why this happens. This is what war happened. But if I actually look at the brass tacks of it, I'm like, I don't know. Figure it out.
Right.
I think I have bits and pieces of both, where all like parts of my world are super detailed, and I could tell you about the 3 royal families that rule the land and, you know, their family histories, and then they'll be like, but what about this little area over here? And I'm like, what is one trope in world building that you can't seem to break away from? Something that you're seeing consistently pop up within your world building, good or bad?
I would say it's very good, but I think Jacob and a few other people would say that it's not very pleasing as a story concept, but I find myself incapable of writing actual villains. Like I can't just make a person who's a monster. And I know that there are like real world people that we've seen recently and publicly that just do hate humans. Like there are genuine people with like misfiring neurons or psychopathy as a clinical development where, oh, that person just is harmful and they can't be redeemed. But I hate that truth so much that in my fiction I avoid it. I don't want anyone to be irredeemable.
I think that's really nice.
Yeah,
Personally, I think that's touching.
Is there a trope in world building that you really just cannot tolerate? Something that you see a lot of other people doing that you're like, gosh, I hate it.
I found it recently, and it really shone out, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but in Hades, who's the god of death? Starts with a TH. Yeah, Thanatos. And the way that he's presented in that game, like, there's a problem with angsty, brooding characters. I find a lot of the time where they overweigh their minor faults and they see like, oh, well, sometimes I drink beer in the shower at 3 a.m. And it's like, you're not that deep. You don't have to cry about it and never talk to anyone. Because you think that like what you do is going to damage everyone around you. Like, that's just not... People, it's characters who think that their problems are a lot deeper than they are. And people who weigh their problems as heavier than other people's. And they suffer because they choose to. But it's certain things that it's hills that they choose to die on that I really don't like.
Sure.
It's not that deep.
I vibe with it. I'm not able to articulate a thought about it, but I vibe with that immensely.
What is your favorite concept that you've come up with recently? Just something that you've world built or created that you really, really enjoy.
Okay. Recently is kind of the pin in that question because I always fall back on the dragons that I've built for my main world for Tesseract.
Ooh.
Tell us more.
I did a bunch of research into European dragons and into Chinese lung dragons. And I found that Chinese dragons, generally, they're extremely benevolent, and all of them have like a gemstone or an orb on the nape of their neck, or not the nape, like right in front of the most vulnerable part of their neck.
Right.
European dragons are the same thing as like cougars or bears. They're just animalistic and they're hungry and they're dangerous. So I was thinking, what if they were a completely different species, where you would have the Draconum, which is just like the underlings of dragons, or these creatures that roam in forests, and maybe they collect gold because it's shiny. They're like fish. They don't do it because they're greedy or haughty or full of themselves like fat cats. They're just stupid animals.
Right.
These godlike dragons that have this incredible ability to kind of move the world around them, I would call them the Dracodaeus. And I was thinking, like, what kind of thing would they be given by the god that made them? And the motif of having a gemstone on your neck, I was like, well, what if that thing could grant wishes? And like they had control over the way that the world functioned based on what wish they would give themselves. And that forged a major part of the history, and eventually people fought against dragons, and there's this whole subplot. And yeah, it was a major part of the way that the world developed, was having that mechanic. But I think recently, I'm building the universe that my books are all written in. It's its own kind of Eldermancy world, and each of them is written in like subsections or chapters, kind of like how Dark Souls works with each rekindling of the flame.
Yeah.
But one motif that I really like is that ghosts are hidden from the god of death. So it's not necessarily that they're cursed to like do something specific, or that they necessarily want to be ghosts or don't. It's that whatever circumstance caused them to die has put them in the blind sight of the god of death, so they can never be collected. And the only way that they appear to mortals is during dawn or dusk, when the god of death is proverbially sleeping.
I like both of those a lot.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Those are both really awesome.
I really like the concept of ghosts being out of the purview of the god of death because they are effectively undead. Are you playing off of the undead quality of them, or is there just something else where you found in your research that you were...
I'm still working on what undeath means in the Eldermancy universe, because obviously there are waking like armies of undeath that want everyone to be dead. Like that's the whole Orcus thing. That's most undead in the classic settings. So I'm trying to figure out why other types of undead would want everyone to also be dead. And I think I'm gonna try and make it like a family concept, where the rest of them are like, oh, we're all brothers and sisters and you're just waiting to get here, so why don't we help you along? And the ghosts are just kind of an offshoot of that. They're like a cousin of skeletons and zombies.
Fair enough.
So what are some strategies that you employ when you come to that world building writer's block, where it's either you get yourself overwhelmed or you kind of reach a point where you're like, the now what situation?
Well, that's a very interesting problem that I run into a little bit with just about everything that I do, because a lot of what I do is just creative design. So I'm writing books, I'm writing scripts for videos that have to be entertaining and comedic, and then in the background of that, I'm trying to kind of develop my own ideas and stuff. So it's easy to find roadblocks and stuff, but I think it's really important to know when you're just at your creative limit for the day. So just kind of stop trying to create when you run out of ideas, and trust that they'll happen the next day. And if they don't, then work on something that doesn't need you to be creative, and eventually you can cycle back. I also think not limiting yourself and trying to find out like why you don't explore different parts of world building, and kind of understanding what you're comfortable with and what you're not, and what you're familiar with. Like if you're familiar with a bunch of other cultures, then it's really easy to mix and mash and reimagine these ideas and create something new. But if you don't do all the research, or you just go with surface level knowledge, then you're going to run out of ideas really fast. Some of the most self-destructive writers, their advice is write drunk and edit sober.
I've never...
I don't do that, but that is a thing where it's like, when you start putting your pen to paper, don't even think about what's going to matter or what you're developing, because when you come back to that, then you'll have the building blocks for what you're actually going to make.
I do not want to edit drunk me's writing. So when I first started world building, I of course typed into YouTube how to world build, I think just trying to figure out how I even started. And something that I remember hearing, especially in your video, was, just get started, your world's never going to be finished. And I wanted to ask you, what did you feel like the main reason was that you felt like your world was unplayable even after world building for 6 years?
That's an interesting pitfall that I think every passionate creator falls into. And it's one of the rules of the world that we live in, where there's no upside to it. It's definitely a catch-22. But the more passionate about your world that you are, the more you're going to create, and the less you're going to let other people create. And the less that you share your creation during that process, the less you're going to be able to share it overall. So the world that I've made is extremely fun to explore for me, but I had a lot of struggles because it's my first one and it was my biggest one that I cared about the most, that everything had to be right in my own mind. And I feel like everyone falls into that, and that's why railroading even exists. That's why bad stories in video games exist, is because everyone cares too much about them. So I think that's just a catch-22. Once you've written a story for 6 years, it kind of is unplayable unless you start to really strip things down. So overdevelopment.
Overdevelopment, yeah, I can see where you're going with that. Overdevelopment leads to railroading. It leads to, this is the way that things should be in the mind of the creator, and so the players feel limited in what they can do.
Did you ever end up using that setting that you created in that simple guide to world building? I think it was like belched from an elder monster and tied down.
Hollow Earth sort of situation.
I am really happy with that one. It was a very open-minded concept that just kind of fell together when I was drafting the video. I haven't used it, but I am exploring the idea of a setting where it's entirely underwater, and you're like I might kind of look into like the Pikmin angle of it, where you're extremely small, so the ocean feels like it's interstellar. It feels like space.
Do you have any advice for first-time world builders?
I would say if it's your first time world building, it's really important that you don't seek advice, because like this is where you're planting your roots for your own the way that you write and the way that you world build, and it's important to just kind of be confident, I would say, in your own abilities, even though they're gonna be subpar when you start, because that's just how things go. That's how being an artist works. Is when you don't have the experience, you don't know what you're doing, so it's not going to be the best. But don't expect it to be the best right off the bat. Expect to enjoy writing, and then once you find the few things that you enjoy the most by just throwing all these darts at the wall, seeing what sticks, eventually you'll find something that you're excited about, but you aren't familiar with. And then I would just encourage you to really do research, and eventually everyone will find their niche, I would say.
Yeah, I think that falls back on something that we've tried to communicate pretty regularly in our world building series. It's wherever you want to start is effectively the correct answer. It's just how you go about it, and you should feel comfortable and confident in where you start and how you go about it, because your process is your own. And I think you put it perfectly. That's what being an artist is all about. That's how it is.
It's confidence in your inability, and eventually that will develop into an ability before you're ever aware.
Thank you guys so much, and we'll transition to our outro. Say bye, and thank you to Runesmith for me one last time.
Thank you to Runesmith.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Let us know in the comments below something that you enjoyed about today's video, or if you have an idea that you're willing to share.
If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to hit all those buttons that everyone else bugs you about. We would love for you to join our lunch table.
And go subscribe to Runesmith's YouTube channel if you haven't already, or support him on Kickstarter.
Alrighty, lunch buddies. I'm Kat.
I'm Arden13. I am still waiting on that ramen.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.